beautiful question. So the question is, there's people online, so I'm going to repeat your question. That if someone in a particular community, if someone finds that the more that you deal with, if you're trying to establish a relationship with someone, but they're mistreating you, and you're treating them well, and they keep mistreating you, do you just leave it, or do you continue, or what do you do in that regard? That's a very practical, good question. What I understand from this is that, first of all, we recognize, our Prophet ﷺ said that لا خير في من لا يألف ولا يؤلف. There's no good in anyone that doesn't befriend or allow himself to be befriended. Meaning that ulfa is a state of familiarity. It's a state of accord. That it's a positive trait to lower the barriers that you have, such that you can have a close and familiar relationship with someone. That's actually something desirable in the sacred law. And then to keep up a series of barriers such that people can't draw close to you is actually a negative thing, right? However, at the same time, but it doesn't mean that you open yourself up so that people can burn you. And I mentioned this time and time again, some of you have probably heard me mention this several times, but to me there's so much wisdom in it that this is the way to understand these type of things. As that Sheikh Abdul Rahman al-Saqaf, one of the great scholars of the Ba'adawi, that he said that people could be like wolves or sheep. So he said, if you see people being like wolves, don't be a sheep. And if you see people being like sheep, don't be wolves. Meaning that there are people that are wolf-like, and meaning that they will try to take advantage of you. They will try to manipulate you. They will try to, pry into you, and they'll try to reel you in, and then once they got you, then they're going to burn you. There's people, that are like that, and those are some of the worst people, some of the worst people that do those type of things. That through the power of intellect, they reel you in and then they manipulate you. That's Allah salama al afiyah. But the thing is though, is that you have to learn and to reach a state where that you know people's different personality types as you mature religiously and then just in general in other walks of life. Is that if you see someone that has a wolf-like nature, is that you have to, at times, growl, right, to ward off their wolf-like nature from you. Right? Meaning that you have to carry yourself in a certain way to protect yourself from getting your rights transgressed. And there's nothing wrong. Every believer should carry themselves with dignity. And that you should carry yourself in such a way that people will respect you. And if you feel that they're going to take advantage of you, then you have to set up a barrier so they don't take advantage of you. And at the same time though, is that you should also be able to interact with people that are like sheep. Because there are a lot of people that are just very simple, very easy to get along with, and then those are the people that are also the most vulnerable. But to be able to, even though you know how to act like a wolf if need be, when it's with the sheep, you just be like sheep-like. And you have a nice relationship. And so that's generally kind of, how you have to deal with that. As for do you keep trying or do you not keep trying, that depends upon the particular situation. And that ultimately, that the high road is always to respond to any situation with what is best. And that you never repay an evil with another evil, but at the same time it doesn't mean that you have to befriend every Muslim. Is that as long, in terms of Sharia, as long as you're not intending to cut someone off, right, and you're not intending to forsake them for more than 3 days, then you're fine. You don't have to be best friends with everyone. And that if you continue trying, doors keep closing, then that you might not want to focus as much on that relationship, unless that you feel that it's someone close to you or it's someone in your family that by being persistent, even though they're dealing with you in that particular way, that there's a long-term benefit. Then you might want to really think about, being patient and overcome. So it just really depends upon the situation. You have to know your limits of the law, at the same time, what is best from the standpoint of ihsan. Very good question. Thank you. So the question was from our sister, that if there's people that are around you that are of a bad influence that you feel could affect you and take from your state, that how do you deal with that particular situation? That first of all is that you recognize is that the single most important thing in the eyes, in the sight of God, is to take care of your own state. And that God says in the Quran that those who go astray will not harm you if you are guided. Alaykum bi anfusikum. Worry about your own selves. Meaning that the primary, the primary responsibility of everyone is their own personal salvation. And that at the same time is that the Prophet ﷺ, as we mentioned yesterday, he had a concern for all of humanity. And that his concern transcended his particular time, and that's obviously the pinnacle. And then there's various degrees therein. The principle states, though, is that you never extend yourself to help other people to the extent that you're harming yourself. But the more people that you can benefit without harming yourself, the better. So meaning that, there are people, for instance, when I converted, for instance, in 1996, that I had many friends that, our relationships were based upon things that were haram, that were just of no use. And that I found that I tried a few times spending time with them after I became Muslim. It was very difficult. It just dragged me down. And I realized very quickly that that wasn't, something conducive for my choice to become Muslim. So I had to leave them. And I have other friends, though, that have always kept in touch with some of our friends from Islam. And they have a type of personality that they can go in and speak to them and spend time with them without being dragged into, their world, and actually benefit them and help them come out of that. And so it really depends upon the person. If someone is the type of person that they can actually extend their hand to people, in this particular context or another context, and help them out without harming their own self, that's actually a noble thing to do. They should do that. If, however, they feel through spending time with other people and so forth that it's dragging them down and it's reminding them of their past and preventing them from moving forward, then at that point that they should separate themselves, and that they're required to do that, in fact. So everyone's different in that regard, and someone you'll find you'll eventually work out a comfort level where you kind of know when you're overextending yourself and when you're not, and so forth. Does that kind of answer your question? Do you have a question to ask me?
Someone else's.
Someone else's, okay. Is it permissible to distance yourself for a period of time from a relative who is disrespectful towards you? Can you be amicable but not interact with them? So meaning that, again, as long as you, one, don't intend to make hajr, to forsake them, and that at least where you just see them that you send salams, right? It doesn't mean that you have to see them every day. As long as you're not intentionally cutting them off, that's what reaches the level of haram, of being unlawful. Right? It doesn't mean that you have to see them on an everyday basis. But if you do see them, that you don't avoid them. You send your salams and khalas. Right? You don't have to sit and talk to them for 5 hours and that type of thing. The key is to not intentionally, forsake them, and to preserve the bare minimum. So yeah, you could just be amicable and just be friendly with them and so forth. And and there is, some people, unfortunately, that you have to be overly friendly with them to protect yourself from their evil. There's people that are like that. And that there was a story of that in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, where there was a man that came to the door where the Prophet ﷺ was very nice to them. And the Sayyidah Aisha asked about what the Prophet said before the man came to the door and why he then was so nice to him. And then he said is that the worst of people are those that you have to be nice to protect yourself from their evil. And that there's people that are like that you have to go out of your way to be nice to them to protect yourself from their evil, because they're just like wolves in sheep's clothing. And that's another reason. So there is precedence for that in English. The wolves in sheep's clothing. Wolves in sheep's. Can you talk about this idea of controlling one's nafs and bettering one's relationships in the context of marriage, and how one can improve their marriage? I'm glad my wife is not here, else she'd be like, who do you think you are to talk about this? Just kidding. But that in general, the principle states, even though we all fall short in all of our relationships with our spouses and in general, that this is the same thing applies, right? Is that we have to recognize and distinguish between what is anger and annoyance for the sake of Allah, and what is anger and annoyance for the sake of the self. If it's anger and annoyance for the sake of the self, right? Khalas, you have to leave it. If there's anger and annoyance for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, that's something else. But the majority of time, and most of the time, that our anger and our annoyance is for the sake of our own nasty, dirty little nafs. That it's, and the idea behind it would be is that one of the ways to determine that, were there to be other people present, and they to see your little tantrum, or the way you just responded, or how you just acted, that what would they think about the way you just responded to a particular situation? If they were religious people and would concur that your anger was justified for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, and that you exerted that anger in a way that was befitting for anger solely for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, then that's one thing. But there's people that get angry for the sake of the nafs and then exert their anger for the sake of us. If it's true anger, it has to be for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, and it has to be exert from you and be that deployed in a way that is for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. So that you might be angry for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, and then all of a sudden you push, right? You hit your kid so hard that you break your arm. What is that? Right? That's a bunch of nonsense. That's not anger for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. Because it was true anger for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, that one, that it would be, the premise of it would be something that would be of the nature of righteous indignation, and two, that it would be implemented in a particular way of where the maslahah, the benefit is, right? And that one of the signs of that it is anger for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, were someone at that moment to say something that went against your nafs, that you would be able to withhold. And here we've all heard this famous story of Sayyidina Ali. When he was fighting that man, he was about to take his life, and then he spits in his face, and then he stops. At first, that I was fighting for the sake of God. Then when you spit in my face, I wanted to kill you and then I stopped. Right? He withheld himself in that moment. Right? Meaning, were someone to say something to you, and then will you just make you even more angry? That's not anger for the nafs, for the sake of Allah. That's anger for the nafs. And that one of the signs of righteous indignation is that he used to say that there was a scholar, whenever he would chide someone or rebuke someone for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, that he would do it with that intention, and then the next time that he would see them, that he would be soft and gentle and smiling and lovely. Meaning that was what he had to do at that particular moment. And then that after that was done for the sake of Allah Ta'ala, the foundation is the foundational way you deal with people is one of mercy and so forth, and then it's back to your regular interactions and trying to gently, drive people towards Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. And Allah Ta'ala knows best.